right, so we're here to talk about crafting interactions with core animation. One of the key things that I want you to notice from the title is that it's interactions. I didn't say crafting beautiful animations. We've had a couple of excellent sessions on interactions, interaction design, user experience design, so I'm very excited to see that. Anytime you can get that kind of stuff at a developer conference, I think it's awesome. So a little bit about me. I'm David Ortinau. For 17 years-ish, I've been doing interactive stuff. That seems to be the term that I most broadly covers what I do. I've worked in, I think I started with ASP and Access, right? Who else started with ASP and Access? All right. So quickly moved on to a lot of other web technologies, ASP.NET. I've done Flash for 15 plus years. It's really been fun to say the word Flash to people as I've been talking to them and see the various reactions in their faces. Because it's always very interesting. And then when I tell them that I have delivered Flash on an iPad and it doesn't run like crap, they're like, what? You're blowing my mind. Why would you even want to? So I have delivered to iOS with PhoneGap, with Flash. I've written apps in Objective-C. I've also delivered to Android, and I've used Xamarin. So I'm a huge Xamarin fan. I had a guy contact me just earlier today asking me if I wouldn't be interested in, instead of doing Xamarin, doing PhoneGap. Because a lot of agencies, a lot of companies are more comfortable with HTML and JavaScript. They feel like that's in their core competency, and that's what they want to deliver. And I was like, you know what? I understand the business reasons for these things, but I can't get the level of quality and performance that I want with these technologies, so I'm going with Xamarin. It's fantastic. And I've done the Objective-C thing. This is awesome. I am so excited. The keynotes, man, everything has been amazing. So I have a crush, a little bit of a crush on Xamarin right now. And you'll notice that I have a BA in English. So if you're expecting a computer science discussion of core animation today, you're going to be slightly disappointed. So currently, I work on a product called ThisLife. Has anybody ever heard of ThisLife? If you're not in Silicon Valley, you probably haven't. So it's a Palo Alto startup that does photos and videos in the cloud. So I came onto this project about 2.5, 3 years ago to do their Flex application development. We had a very nice MVC architecture. We handled 50,000 moments. We call them moments. They're either videos or photos. We can stream them down very quickly, animate them across the screen, do some really very nice stuff with a large amount of data. As Flash has done what Flash has done, or should I say what Adobe has done, HTML5 has gained the ascendancy, and since I work in all of these things, it was very easy for me to transition this application with the rest of the team over to HTML5. So in January of this past year, we were acquired by Shutterfly. So now I work for Shutterfly. My badge says Shutterfly, not to misrepresent, but I am a contractor. So I'm not an employee. Nothing that I say today represents Shutterfly in any way or ThisLife. This is me. I run my own consulting business. I'm a vendor for various creative agencies. So I do a lot of kiosk work, a lot of touchscreen work, certainly some web work. Over the years, I've done games. I've done e-cards, you know, the jib-jab type stuff. Actually, I've got some of that on my computer. It's a leprechaun that insults you. It's very cool. So a wide range of things. This is my Xamarin app. Not my Xamarin app. It's a Xamarin app that my company has done for a client in San Francisco. So in the Bay Area, what this is, it's a Calvetica-inspired calendar app for private and public schools. We aggregate all that calendar data together from all these different schools so that you can see, you know, I've got 4 children. And so I've got currently 3 schools that they're going to, soon to be 4. To be able to see all that event information as well as like the buzzbook and the directories, right? To see all that information in one place is a very nice feature. So we've got this, we've got some the common animations that you're seeing, the patterns for navigation. We've got a little slide out from the side menu. When you're picking the color, we've got a slide up from the bottom color picker thing going on there. So this is all built with Xamarin iOS. We absolutely love it. It's fantastic, works great, runs great. Deploy to test flight, seriously, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. When I found that feature in previous mono develop, I'm like, shut up, it's awesome. Right? Is it awesome? Give me some feedback, people, come on. Not, don't clap for me, clap for the technology. Okay, so what we're really here to talk about. We're here to talk about animation, obviously. We're going to talk about the architecture of core animation. I'll do my best to represent that from a technical aspect. We're going to talk about implicit and explicit animations. And then we're going to talk about tweens. I'm very excited about what I've been able to do from a demo standpoint with tweens, because I've talked to several people about, hey, how are you doing, you know, the timing of your things to create some of the more advanced effects that you might be used to. Coming from a Flash background, we have some amazing easing and tweening libraries. If you've done any jQuery, you know, they've kind of emulated what we've done for years in the Flash community. And how do you do those things on Objective-C or in Xamarin? So I've got a really, I think it's pretty cool. It works great. I hope you like it. And all along the way, I'm going to show you real-world use cases. So these are use cases for animation for interactions that I pulled from real applications that I got paid real money to do. These are not, you know, things that you could never dream of. So hopefully, you're going to leave here with a lot of practical information that you can immediately take out and improve your animations in your applications. How many of you have used core animation? So we've got, okay, about half of you maybe have experience with it, and the rest of you, you're here to learn. Cool. Well, everybody's here to learn. So when we talk about animation, this is what you think of, right? You think of Steamboat Willie, you think of Disney. No, that's not what you're here to listen to. But Disney has something very important to say about this topic. I just got back from Disney World, okay? It's the second time I've been in 2 years. And who's been to Disney? All right. So you know that when you go to Disney World, it's another world, isn't it? Talk about a reality distortion field. You go into this place, and it's like they're all on happy pills. Everybody's super nice, right? They're there to make your life super easy. They care about the smallest details. They have crafted every aspect of your experience from the moment that you drive into the property till you are, I'm probably stepping too far forward. When you drive into the property to when you get to the resort, to the person that you're talking to, everybody is either super happy to be there or not displeased to be there, right? Even the people working the vending, you know, where you go get your pretzels and they're super excited to be there. So this past time, we also took, in the middle of our trip, when we went to Universal Studios, this is Orlando, Universal Studios right down the road. They have amazing rides, fantastic stuff, but it's a whole different feel. Because the people, you know, they kind of work there. It's like Six Flags. It's kind of a little bit dirtier. Well, Six Flags is a lot dirtier, actually. I'm from St. Louis, so we have a Six Flags, and it's the dirtiest thing I've ever seen. Every trash can has a sign that says, help keep your park clean. And I'm thinking to myself, Disney never asked me to help keep the park clean. Why is this now my responsibility to pick up the trash? So, but Disney crafts every aspect of the experience because they realize that they're creating an experience. And what makes that so amazing is they're taking care of the small details. And that's a key that we want to keep in mind as we're designing what we're designing. We're designing an experience. So if we consider, anybody have the brick phone? I didn't own one. We rented them for events. Those things got really hot, would burn your hand. I definitely had a flip phone. I remember my first bag phone. I remember my first Nextel push-to-talk. That was an amazing feature they added, right? But initially, your phones would just, you could make a phone call, and then eventually, maybe you could do the push-to-talk thing. And then, oh gosh, I remember the first Nextel phone I got, you flip it open, it did this amazing animation. It was like some Java thing, right? And that was cool. And then eventually, you could load Java games that were just like Bejeweled or something. And you'd never want to play it because it took too long to boot up, and then it would probably crash. You know, and then all the way down to this. What's been happening is as people use these things, and as our experiences have grown and our expectations for what we can do with them have grown, and to the point where we like identify ourselves. Like, you know, I don't have a home phone anymore. I've got this thing, and I carry this thing around with me everywhere I go, and I know it's mine. I know exactly how it behaves. I know how it feels. Like your computer, when you program, you know how that thing feels. And if it's starting to run a little slow, you can feel that. You're that in tune with your computer. That's where our phones have gotten to. So this is a common example of something that I've had to animate. It used to be with touchscreen kiosks for live events and things like that. You're building something that's like a 32-inch touchscreen. You have maybe 2 touch points on it, and you could do some basic stuff with it. You usually had a Mac Mini running it with Windows 7, because that's how you get the fastest performance on those things. Now they all want iPads. So they're mounting iPads to these live event things, and you have masses of people coming through these venues. And so in order to get their attention, you have to build an attraction loop, okay? So it's some crazy thing or something simple that is just animating on the screen to say, hey, I'm alive. You can touch me and you can do something with me, okay? That's what an attraction loop is all about. You don't want your animations to just stand there. Just standing there works if you're guarding Buckingham Palace. But if your application just stands there and doesn't communicate to the user that something can be done, you're probably not delighting the user. You're not telling the user that your app's alive and ready to do something for them. And you're also not guiding them for what they might be able to do with your application. But at the same time, you don't want to be crazy like this guy. You don't want your app to be like, hey, I might stalk your child, right? If you know this guy, I really apologize. But to me, this guy looks a little sketchy, right? Go with this. This is an amazing analogy. So you don't want your animations to be scary. You want them to have meaning. But at the same time, you don't want them to be obnoxious, right? So it's fantastic what they're doing with Windows 8. You may be a fan. I like the Windows Phone. I think that's really cool. But if another client comes to me and says, I want a page curl, I want parallax scrolling, and they have like minimal concept of what that really means, the thing is you have to have a good place for everything. You remember when Apple released the carousel animation in OS X? Anybody? Yeah, I've got like 2 nods and everybody else is going to sleep on me. I'll start shouting. It's going to happen. Everybody wanted that. Every app that you built, oh, we need the carousel. You got to have the carousel. It's like, but we don't need the carousel. It doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing. Oh, no, we need the carousel. So when you're considering what animations that you're going to use, keep in mind that just because it's the latest fad doesn't mean that it's appropriate for your application. Disney understands their users. Disney knows how to delight their customers. I've got a 14-year-old, 11-year-old, 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and they all absolutely love Disney. Here's a story for you. So the last time at Disney, we're going to Magic Kingdom, and we have a big princess thing at Belle's Castle at the end of the day, so we had to go. But my 5-year-old wasn't feeling very well, so she stayed home in the morning and showed up around noon. And they have these parades. Has anybody ever seen the Disney parades? These things are like epic, huge. And what's crazy to me is you look at these dancers, these people, I don't know what they're making. They might be making good money, but maybe not. But they look thrilled to be out there dancing for these kids. The ones that are in the big costumes, but there's like real people too. Look how happy that person is on the right. They're thrilled to be dancing at Disney. And the kids just absolutely, you watch the kids' faces and they're eating this up. Disney understands their audience so well. So here's what happens. My daughter unloads her entire lunch in front of Cinderella's castle. Unloads it. My wife says, I didn't get to see this, but my wife relates it this way. She says, out of nowhere, Disney cleanup crew swarms the scene, cleans up all the barf as if it never existed within like a minute. It's the best barf experience ever, right? Disney gets this. They know what's going on. And they didn't make her feel stupid or bad for her kid having yacked all over Cinderella's front step. And then, then they took her back to the not urgent care, but the first aid facility, and she got to hang out. They didn't make me sign anything. They didn't charge me any extra money for the care that they took care of us. It was amazing. This is what we want our apps to feel like. We want our customers to feel that way about what we're doing. So what this all comes down to is interaction design. So this is defining the structure and behavior of our systems, but also striving to create meaningful relationships between people and products. So the 2 key words that I want to hone in on right quickly, and we're going to get some code. I know you all want to see code. We're getting there. Meaningful and people. This is all about user-centric, understanding your users. Jenica Welch had a great session the first morning, on designing beautiful iPad apps or something to that effect. Check it out. Get the download if you weren't there. Was anybody else there? It was fantastic. Not the phone gap. I don't want to talk about phone gap anymore. The Tapworthy session, that was great this morning also, wasn't it? And he touched on a lot of these same issues. Understanding our users and making sure that what we're doing is meaningful, that it supports the interactions. So there's 3 questions that Bill Verplank and Bill Mogridge are the 2 guys that coined the interaction design phrase. They say you should be asking 3 questions when you're creating your interactions. How do you do? You being the user. How is the user doing something? Are we supporting what they do? Do we understand the task they're trying to accomplish? How do you feel? Are we delighting them? Are we making them feel good about using the application, or do they feel stupid because they generated an error and we didn't appropriately handle it in a way that made them feel okay about it? And how do you know? How do they know how to use your application, right? Have we given them any indication by way of animation or some other mechanism that this is where you start, or this is how this thing moves, or that this thing can move? The example this morning, I think it was the USA Today app, the USA News app, about that scrolling slider of categories at the top of the iPhone app. People couldn't figure out that they were able to click that, so what they did was, on the first load of the app, it would transition in. When you see it transition in, you're like, okay, that probably moves. So then you try to move it, and you learn that that's what it does. Core Animation makes all this so super easy. It's baked into the UI kit stuff. You have no excuse not to use it, really. All you can do is just make it better, and I'm going to try to show you how to do that. So you're going to open up a UI view animate block. You're going to give it a duration of 4 seconds or however many seconds. Those are seconds, not milliseconds. If you've done a bunch of animation, you might be used to giving it milliseconds, but in this situation, we're giving it seconds. You're going to give it an animation action, and all you're going to tell it is, take my frame, move it. Move it, resize it, whatever I want you to do to my frame. And Core Animation is going to take this, and it's going to figure out what it's supposed to do to make it happen in a nice, easy way. A lot of these side menu, just sliding things in, that's exactly what they do. All right, so the architecture of Core Animation. Everybody with me? Loving this? All right, all the pretty pictures are gone. It's all code now. Sorry, guys. So we have, at the base level, we've got the graphics hardware. Above that, we've got OpenGL and Core Graphics. And then we've got UIKit at the top, and then sandwiched in between UIKit and OpenGL Core Graphics, you have the Core Animation. So inside Core Animation, you're going to see things like CA layers, okay? Inside a CA layer, you're able to add sublayers. So just like you have a UI view, typical structure of our applications, you have a UI view controller. That UI view controller is talking to a UI view or has a UI view, and you can add additional UI views to it with the add sub view, right? Well, the same way with layers. You can access a layer, and you can start adding sublayers to that as well. Insert sublayer at an index, so if you want to put something at a certain level in the hierarchy, you can do that. Set needs display and set needs layout are a couple of methods that you can find useful for invalidating the display if you have to do that. We might talk a little bit about that later. And then you have the animation classes. You have group animation, property animation, basic animations, keyframe, and transitions. We're not going to be talking about transitions. Transitions are pretty self-explanatory. Getting from one screen to another, how do you do that? Is it doing a slide over? Is it doing a flip? Is it, something like that? We're primarily going to be talking about basic and keyframe animations because we can do a ton of things there. So every view has a CA layer. And these CA layers are responsible for what you see. And it's real simple to access the CA layer of any UI view. It's someView.layer, right? Simple as that. You're immediately talking to the layer. The UI view is responsible for interactions. So if you're accessing the CA layer and you're trying to get a touch event on it, it's not going to happen. Now, there is a way around that. If you want to access touch events on a CA layer, you can use gesture recognizers. Anybody familiar with those? So those are great. That's how you're going to need to do that. But UI view is responsible for the interactions, and the CA layer is what you're seeing. So here's what this looks like. It's a composition of layers, okay? If you're familiar with Photoshop, Illustrator, pretty much any design app that has layers to it, this is exactly what we're talking about. So at the top level, we've got a UI view. Inside that UI view, we've got a CA layer for something like a logo, maybe. This is just an example of UI. This is not a wireframe for the most amazing design ever, okay? You've got a CA layer and a UI view. Nested within that UI view, you've got another UI view. Nested within that, we've got an image and a label. So you see how this hierarchy is. Things are nested inside of other things. And this becomes important when we start talking about performance, okay? Because all these things need to get laid out. All these things need to get rendered. So what Core Animation is going to do, it's going to take all these different layers of things, and it's going to flatten it down to a bitmap, okay? It's going to rasterize it all, throw it up on the screen. And as we learned earlier in the week, it runs at how many frames per second? 60. So 60 times a second, it's going to do that. Flatten all that stuff down and render it to the screen as fast as it can. And we want to make sure that it stays that way, stays that fast. So every UI view has a layer and sets itself as the delegate for that layer. CA layer is going to manage the visual content and the geometry of your content. Okay? So you may be used to accessing some of those properties on the UI view, and you certainly can. What that's doing is just passing it down to the CA layer, and it's just making it easier for you. But when you want to get right at what's actually visually happening with your views, you're going to be accessing the layers. Draw rect is what creates the layer. If you want to create a layer all by itself, you're like, hey, I don't need touch interactions. I want to go bare bones, as performant as possible with what I'm trying to do. You can create a simple CA layer, give it a frame just like you do everything else, and then you can assign something like images to the contents of that CA layer. You can also draw on that CA layer. You could have a class that extends CA layer, and then you override the draw rect, and you can start drawing in there if that's the way you want to do it. But this is like the super easiest way, and in most of my demos, this is how I'm doing it. Just throw an image into the contents, and you've got a CA layer you can start animating with. So the geometry. So there's a couple of points that you want to be aware of here. The main properties, the bounds, the position, the anchor point, and the transform. So X, Y coordinate space, I think we're all familiar with that, right? So let's consider the darker box. It has an anchor point. The anchor point for that thing, what it's going to turn on is not the upper left-hand corner. So the anchor point is actually 0.5, 0.5, which is the dead center of whatever your layer, your view is, okay? So if you're trying to rotate something and you want to rotate around the middle, that's fantastic. If you're positioning something, you need to know where that anchor point is. But if you want to rotate something around a corner or around the side, you need to move the anchor point. So be aware of that when you're animating things and you're like, hey, why isn't it moving the way I think it should? Or you're moving something around a curve and it's not following the way it should. The anchor point might be what you want to look at. Transforms are very useful for doing things like 2.5D animations where you're bending something. Everybody's familiar with the Clear app. I think they showed it actually earlier today, where you're doing a lot of pinching and a lot of things are bending and folding. So that's probably, I looked a little bit at the library that makes that thing happen, and I believe they're using transforms to do that. So the one thing to also be aware of is the dark box inside the gray box. So we are inside the coordinate space of our parent, okay? So when you're dealing with the points that you're animating to and from for your UI view or your CA layer, it's relative to its parent, not relative to the screen. Does that make sense? Cool. So what's core animation doing for us? It's interpolating. You tell it, I want to take box from here and put it here. All you got to do is tell it, go here, and it's going to figure out all the points in between across those 60 frames per second that it needs to do to make that thing look smooth, okay? Timing, it's going to provide you some simple easing equations to make it look a little bit smoother and maybe have a little bit of lag at the beginning or the end. The good news about core animation and why it's so awesome to use, it is hardware accelerated. Animations are happening on the GPU, and also important to understand is that they're happening on a background thread. Have you ever tried to interact with your animation while it's running? Yeah. Or at the end of it, making sure that it's back on the main thread before you try to do something with it. Okay, I'm flying through this stuff. Hope you guys are cool, but I've got demos coming up, so I want to get to that. So within CA layers, you've got a variety of styles. You've got the shape layer, which is exactly what it sounds like. You can draw shapes. You've got a tile layer, which you're going to give it some content, and it's going to give you a grid. You've got a text layer, which is a simple text. You've got a scroll layer, which is going to give you some scroll functionality, and you've got a replicator layer. The replicator layer is going to take whatever contents you throw at it, and it's going to render out as many versions of it as you ask for, and it's going to, along the way, apply any transforms that you provide to it. So you might be tempted to do things like particle systems with the replicator layer, but there's actually a whole different API for doing particles, which we're actually not covering, but just wanted to make you aware of that. Okay, so what's happening when we're rendering animation? This goes back to what I was saying before about the nesting of your hierarchy. And this is really common across Flash and Silverlight and a lot of these animation platforms. The more you nest something, especially when it needs to composite all that stuff and display it on the screen, you're causing a lot of layout calculations to happening. And unfortunately, layout does not happen on the GPU, it happens on the CPU. Not only does it happen on the CPU, but it's going to happen for every frame that gets rendered. So the more layout it has to do, the slower your animation could potentially become. Now, this may not be a big issue with some of the animations you're doing, but if you find that your animation is not being responsive or is lagging, This may be something to look at. Can you flatten down the hierarchy of your views, right? Can you perhaps take a couple of the visual elements that you have, create one single bitmap, and fake it? You don't have to actually build the hierarchy exactly as it might happen. You just need to make it look like it should be, right? So the first thing that happens is that the animation is going to create the animation and update the hierarchy, prepare and commit the animation, and render each frame. This is really great stuff to understand if you're going to do performance tuning. And at the bottom of my slide here, there's a WWDC session on app performance, graphics and animation. Highly recommend you check that stuff out. I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you have access to the Apple Developer Center, you pretty much have access to all the WWDC videos. Did you know that? Check them out. There's a wealth of information there, and the guys presenting on this stuff may be boring and dry, but they are the guys that probably wrote the APIs that we're using. So, well worth checking that out. Okay, so let's talk about implicit animations. Implicit animations are kind of like a Toyota Camry to me. I was trying to think of a way to visually represent implicit versus explicit. A Toyota Camry is not what I would consider a sexy car, nor is it the kind of car you're going to tinker on. It's a reliable car. It'll get you from point A to point B and probably give you fantastic gas mileage. It does come in a coupe, still not sexy, right? No car geeks in the house. So implicit animations are, you're gonna animate any layer back view. So the example that I showed earlier is a perfect example. It's gonna use default timing. You're gonna wrap things in an animate block. The properties, you're typically going to be affecting the frame, the center, the background, the opacity. So let's take a look at a demo. I was gonna use the document camera, but everything started looking really washed out. So let's do it this way. I'm gonna run it in the emulator. Oh, the size of the emulator is all jacked up. How do you fix that? Command 2. You got it. Ah, there we go. You guys are awesome. I love you so much. All right, so here's what's going to happen. Animation for a notification comes down, does a little glow thing, waits for a few seconds, and then goes away. So it's a little toast notification, right? You may have done this in your applications. You're providing some feedback to your user. You know, a lot of times you get a big modal, but sometimes you don't need a modal. Sometimes something that just comes in from the top or from the bottom, maybe. You know, what's inconvenient about this, right, is that when it comes in from the top, I can no longer get to my navigation bar. Clearly, I would not ship this, but that's where I put my animation. So what does this look like? If this goes full screen, is that going to look any good? Yeah, that's not bad. All right, so the notification. So I create my notification. Here's the animation. So I've got a toggle notification function. It's going to, first it's going to look at the presentation layer. So this is an interesting trick, right? So if your animation is in the middle of doing something, or if it has a pending animation associated to it, what you see on the screen is not represented in the UI view. If you check UI view.frame.y, you're not going to get where it really is on the screen, okay? So what you actually need to do, because the UI view and the layer are completely separate, not completely separate, they're separate. If you want to see what's really on the screen during an animation, you want to access layer.presentationLayer, then access the property that you're looking for. That's what's actually happening during an animation. Cool? So we're going to look for that, and we're going to say, is it less than 0? If it's less than 0, then I'm going to go ahead and animate it. Because what I have is I have the notification at like -60 off screen, and then I'm just going to move it to 0 and move it back to -60. All right, so I'm going to call an animate block. I'm going to go for 0.8 seconds. There's 0, which is no delay. I'm going to give it a couple of options. I'm asking it to time it with a curve ease in. Ease in is going to go, I believe it's a little bit slow and then fast. And then I'm also telling it to allow user interaction, because I have a close button in there, and that close button I want people to be able to click at some point. And then within my animation block, I have notification.frame. because it's already a CA layer. I don't need to actually call layer on that, but I guess I could. I'm going to set the rectangle, and it's going to move it. The next block that you see here, I guess I can be using my mouse, can't I? Instead of pointing at the screen abstractly, and you're all like, what the heck is he pointing at? So here, in this space, this is my completion block. So when it's done running that first animation, I kick off another animation. And here I'm saying, for a duration of 1, I want you to change the background color. So that's when it changed from gray to orange, right? But I also set a different option. I set the auto reverse option, so you saw it go to orange, and then you saw it fade back to gray, right? In the completion block of that, I call another animation function where I'm setting a duration of 0.4, and I'm giving it a delay of 4. So this is the wait. So it came in, changed color, changed back, and now we're waiting for 4 seconds, and we're going to dismiss ourselves. So that's just going to animate it out, is all it's doing. I give it the opposite curve, because I want it to flow out the opposite way, and then we're done. So, make sense? Pretty clear. So there's a couple tricks here. One, the allow user interaction. If I want people to be able to interact with it when it stops or it falls at some point, I need to do that. That's only valid while it's doing something. When I hit that delay of 4, guess what? I can't click on it. No matter what I do, I can't get at it. I click that close button, nothing's happening. So what you end up needing to do, this is just the way that it works because of the way the layers are and everything. So you set up a touches began on the view. And you set up a hit test, okay? Anybody familiar with writing the old-fashioned hit test? So you're going to do a hit test, and I'm going to say, am I hitting the close button? If I'm hitting the close button, then go ahead and toggle that notification, right? Everybody wants to see that animation again because it was so amazing. So now I can come in here and I can dismiss it myself. I know, I just blew your minds. It's crazy. All right, let's keep going. All right, so we actually really covered that. UI view animation options, so we touched on several of these, the allow user interaction, the auto reverse. There are 4 easing equations that we can access, and then we also have a repeat option, which I'll show you a little bit later. We can repeat things, just have it go over and over and over and over again. So this is what those easing equations look like. Linear, which is just point A to point B. There's really nothing organic about that. It's almost completely unnatural because there's friction in the world, isn't there? So you expect things to slow down eventually. So we've got the ease in, the ease out, and then the ease in, ease out, which combines the two. So that's fine. Apple gives us 4, but I think we can do better than that. So here's the Glow Pulse demo. So this is an example where maybe you've got a kiosk and people are walking up to it, and you want them to know that they can touch on something, or you might want to indicate to them where it can start. So you see that far right button? It's pulse glowing, right? It's saying, hey, I'm here, do something with me. And in this particular kiosk application, we ended up adding all kinds of other instructions for users. Because when you have a live event and people are not sitting at their home using their application, you got to show them how to use your app like that. They don't have time to be learning your application. They're not going to sit there and listen to Al Gore explain the interactions. I have that app. I actually watched that when it first came out. Did anybody else see that when it first came out? No, just me. It took forever because like the assets to load that app, it's like several hundred megabytes, and it doesn't load them until after you've installed the app. All right. That was a side note. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting up the similar animation block, but I'm calling both auto reverse and repeat. So what's that going to do? It's going to change the alpha from 0 to 1, from opaque to not opaque, or whichever way that goes. And then it's going to go back the other direction and start over. So it's just going to keep going. I didn't have to tell it to repeat. I mean, I didn't have to give it a repeat number. It just keeps going. And that sucker will continue to go forever until I stop it. And the way that you actually stop an animation like this, you got 2 ways to do it. You can access typically the layer and say remove all animations, okay? Because as you add animations to things, they stack up and they don't go away until you tell them to. Or you can create a brand new animation with a duration of 0, and that will nullify the animations that are already there. Kind of a weird hack. Not a fan of it, but that's apparently the way it goes. Explicit animations. How am I doing on time? I totally lost track of time. Anybody? What time am I supposed to be done? No, well, what, 3:30? All right, we better hustle. So, explicit animations. So this is not the Camry. This is the Batmobile, right? We got some serious stuff going on here. Now, I'll be honest, this is the Batmobile from the movies that we don't really like, right? We're not fans of these movies. These movies were lame. The new movies, way better. But I didn't have a picture of those, so this is what we got. So when we're doing these, we're going to deal with basic animations, group animations, and keyframe. Just real quick, what a basic animation is it's going to define moving one property from here to there, whether it's opacity or scale or frame, and that's it, right? You're defining one kind of transition for that property. If you want to do more than one thing with an explicit animation, you're going to create multiple basics, and you're going to assign them to a group, and then you're going to apply that group to a layer. So that's what the group is there for. The group is there to aggregate your other animations together so that you can combine them. Now, you're going to, this is a mistake that I've made in the past. You're combining animations with a group to apply to a single UI view element, okay? You're not going to say, I'm going to move this UI view to here, and then the second UI view to here, and I'm going to take both of those animations and put them in a group. If you do that, you're going to get some really weird behavior, and Apple's not going to crash. It's not going to tell you you're an idiot. You're just going to have to sit there and look at your animations and try to figure it out. I'm a big fan of error messages, so anytime I don't get an error message when I do something stupid, I feel bad. They don't delight me when that happens. All right, so a couple things that we want to be aware of. You're going to use an explicit animation when you want more fine-grained control. A couple of things that you need to take care of. Because you're working on the layer directly and it's not updating the view, what's going to happen is you're going to move something from point A to point B, and suddenly it's going to disappear and reset to the original position. Anybody ever seen that happen? And you thought to yourself, what the heck just happened? Well, that's because of the fill mode. So we have to explicitly tell it that I want you to fill forwards, so that when you get to the end, that's where you really should be. And we're also going to tell it, typically, in most cases, remove on completion false. So don't go anywhere. Don't disappear on me. When I told you to go from 0 to 100, I meant for you to stay at 100. These are also very good for sequencing animations, which is my next demo, where you want to do multiple things, but in a timed way, more of a timeline kind of a way. And then you can also do custom animations of your own properties. I don't have a demo for this, but it's very cool. And in the monotouch samples up on GitHub, there's some good examples of a pie chart that does this. I think Frank Kruger might have. Frank Kruger's not in here, is he? I haven't met this dude, and I want to meet him, and he's done some animation talks. All right, no, cool. So I can say whatever I want. But he has a good demo of that. So basic animations, here are the properties that we're going to be working with. The key path. The key path represents the property that you're animating. Begin time, when does it start? Duration, how long should it go? From and to, what are the values that we're going to be changing from and to? Now, you don't always have to express the from. If you don't include from, it's going to assume the last value that it had, right? Remove on completion and fill mode, we already talked about. You have a couple of events you can listen to. The animation stopped and animation started. And then you also have those 4 easing functions, just like we've been looking at all along. All right, let's look at my attraction loop demo. All right, so we've got a little kiosk thing here. I took out a bunch of content because I'd probably get in trouble if I showed you who this was for. So it's real simple. Nothing fancy to it, but it's doing something. So I'm animating 3 things. I've got 3 CA layers, and I've timed it out. Not only have I timed it out, but it's looping on different content, so it's somewhat dynamic in that way. And I did this real basic. I could actually do this much better, but I haven't gotten to the easing part of the conversation yet. So here's the flow. I create a slide. I do a transition in. That executes a transition out when it's done. I cycle the slides and start all over. I'm reusing my CA layers. I'm not creating new ones, right? Because you want to reuse as much as possible so that you've essentially cached what's going on. You're not creating more memory than you need to. You're also not triggering garbage collection cycles, so that's good for your performance, right? So that's the essential flow of what's happening here. And here's what one of those animations look like. So you'll see first I'm calling remove all animations. Because I'm cycling and I'm reusing stuff, I want to make sure that the old animations aren't sticking around and screwing things up. Because they will. If you watch the count of animations on your views as you add them, they just continue to climb and climb and climb. So you got to clear it out. This is interesting. You need to define a local media time because essentially you need to create a time space in which these animations exist. If I didn't include this and I just started setting begin time 0, begin time 1, begin time 2 to stagger out my animations, I would actually get some unexpected behavior. The timing wouldn't quite work out the way I expected it to. So what you end up doing is you end up building on top of the local media time. So for the other animations, I do local media time plus 1, local media time plus 2. And that's how I get that staggered timing. I'm going from, to, I'm removing on completion false, fill modes forward. I do give it a timing function of ease out, so it has a little bit of ease to it. And then I add it to my title image, which is my CA layer, right? So that's the essential pattern that you're going to follow. Define your animation, add it to your layer. When you add it to your layer, you need to give it a name. It doesn't have to be the key path name. The key path represents your property, remember? It doesn't have to be position.x there in the middle, but it can be. Maybe it's easy to remember it that way. And the way that I'm cycling, you saw before, I used the delay, right? I delayed for 4 seconds, and then I kicked off the next animation. That becomes hairy when you're dealing with some of these things. And like I said, when an animation is pending, it's actually blocking some execution in your code. So even though it's on a background thread, like you can't always touch on things. So it was safer to create a timer. I create a timer for 500 milliseconds. So, and this is native C# stuff. This is not anything Objective-C behind it. Interval of 5 seconds. After it elapses, I stop the timer. You need to make sure that you're invoking on the main thread, right? Because otherwise your code won't do anything. And then I call the transition out. And I've defined that. I call start. Pretty easy stuff, right? You could totally do this in your sleep. Yeah. You're talking about the from key path position X? Right. Right, that's what I was trying to explain. It doesn't have to say position X. When you add the animation, that can be anything. It could be my favorite slide. But the key path does need to represent the property that you're changing. Okay? If I was changing more than the X, if I was changing both the X and the Y, it would be just position. And so Apple documentation has what those should be. They're not very easy to find, but you can find them. And some of them are shortcut syntax. I have a rotation demo I can show you where you can actually access the transform very easily. Cool? Everybody, hey, there it is. Speak of the devil. Everybody wants to spin. So every time I talk to somebody over the course of the last few days about core animation, first animation they asked about was rotating things. How do you spin something? This is the easiest way to spin something. Now, this isn't going to spin it necessarily to a particular position because for the 2, I'm just passing it pi. Pi is going to rotate you in a circle. The important part about this and what makes this thing spin around without a hitch. Have you ever tried to spin something and it has a hitch at the top of the animation? And you're like, why is that hitch there? It should just keep going smoothly. Cumulative is the key to that. When you set cumulative to true, it's just going to keep moving forward. It's not going to reset at the end of the animation. And I'm giving it a really large repeat of 999. So let's see something spin, Dave. Sure. Get that nice little pinwheel effect, right? So there you go. And it's running pretty smoothly. All right. It is, we've got like 8 minutes. Does that sound good, right? If I'm wrong, somebody shout me down. So keyframe animations. This is the awesome stuff that I really wanted to get to. We can do some really cool things here. So we can animate along a path. We can set keyframes for very fine control. So here's what a keyframe is. Just real quickly, you're going to be accessing path, key times, and values. So here's what a keyframe is. So this is Flash. Get your booze out of the way. But this is visually a good representation of what a keyframe is. So on the top there, you see the timeline. You see we've got from 0 to 60, representing 60 frames per second. So at the very first frame, I've got a keyframe, the black dot. At around 51, I've got a keyframe. At around 55, I've got a keyframe. And around 61, I've got a keyframe. So what I'm doing at those positions is I'm moving this particular square across the screen. Okay? And that arrow that you see in the line represents a tween. And you see on the right-hand side here, I've got an ease out of 90. So that's going to move me across the screen. So what we're doing with the keyframe animation is we're going to set keyframes and tell it, move from here to here, and here's how you get there. You're going to get there along a path. You're going to get there along keyframes. And I can very finely control how that animation happens. All right, so let's look at this infographic. Again, based on a real app that I did. All right, so this is an energy consumption infographic that says you've got solar energy and it's hitting your house, and when you have more sun, you're going to deliver more energy back to the grid. Okay, it's all about, you get a kickback from the energy company, right, for providing energy back to the grid in addition to what you take. So, and you can control it with this slider over here. You kick that thing up, and now you're really cooking with gas. You're making a lot of money off the energy company. So you notice, lo and behold, it's running along a path. I don't know about you. Have you ever seen path code? You ever draw a path from hand like this? Yeah, I see some frowny faces. Let's look at what that looks like. So infographic. Where is that fun code? There it is. Look at that beautiful code. Who wants to draw that from hand, right? All that? You wake up in the morning and you think, I'm going to draw a Bezier path. No. Here's what you do. This application may revolutionize your life. This is called paint code. Anybody ever seen paint code? Yeah, right on. So paint code, what I did was I went to Illustrator, grabbed the path that I needed from the designs that I received from my designer, grabbed this path, copied it, or I think I saved it as an SVG. Then I brought it into paint code, and what paint code does, right there, it's beautiful. I can generate Objective-C, or I can generate C# for monotouch. It's awesome. I love this. Saved me billions of hours. So you put that in there. Let's see, where am I creating my animation? Okay, animate the dot. So I'm creating a bunch of dots, and I'm throwing them on the screen. So I create a keyframe animation. I'm changing the position, not just the X, but I'm changing all of the position. I pass in my path that I've created in that method up above. Pass that into the path. I give it a duration. I set the pacing. The calculation mode is important. You got to set a pace for it, otherwise you get a real stuttered animation. You give it forwards. Remove on completions true in this case, because as soon as that dot goes off screen, I want to get rid of it. Now, if I really wanted to take care of this thing, I would probably cache all that stuff and reuse them, do some recycling. For this demo, I'm not doing that. I set my timing function as linear because I just want it to keep going at the regular pace. And then when it stops, I remove it from the super layer and I dispose of it. All right, so we got one more cool demo here for you, and then we're done. Is this good? Are you guys getting anything out of this? Yeah? All right, couple nods, couple snores. Good, good, good. Yeah?
Question about the code.
Yeah.
You have to move on completion, and then you add explicit removal when completed.
Right.
What's the distinction?
It's removing the animation, but it's not actually garbage collecting it from the view structure. Okay? So it's gonna reset it and do all that stuff. Probably more than I'm glossing over. But to actually garbage collect and get rid of it, you got to deal with it. All right, so paint code, we talked about that. We already looked at that code. Let's talk about easing. So remember this? That's not good enough. We want this. Look at all those easing equations. We got some bouncing. We got some elasticity. That's some cool stuff. That's what we want. So how do we do this? Bounce demo. All right. So I got a little menu, slides in from the side and bounces. Now, I've talked to some people about doing bounce demos, and if you search the internet, you'll find several blog posts about this, about the labors and the trials of calculating your keyframes to make something like this happen. It doesn't have to be that hard. It's actually really, really easy. So here's what we do. So we have an easing equation. This is what's going to figure out all the math to do what's happening. Remember when I said I had an English degree? I am not even going to try to explain that math to you. Robert Penner is famous for his easing equations and many other things. He worked for Disney for a while, I know. So he wrote these easing equations, heavily used in pretty much every Flash tweening library. It's been incorporated into JavaScript tweening libraries, all kinds of stuff. So this stuff is out there, and Robin DeBrule, who's a Canadian, and did a lot of Flash work and then did a lot of XNA work, has a nice library up on GitHub, and I've got a reference to it here in the slides as well as in the back of the slides, where you can go get his easing equations written in C#. So all I did was translate what Penner had done to C#, and so we can use them. Here's how I'm using them. So I created a class with a static method. The class is called Tween Builder. It's got a static method saying create the key values. So what it's going to do, you're going to pass in the from and the to values and which equation you want to use. And then you've got an optional parameter at the end there for steps. Steps being, you can consider it time. It's going to be spread evenly across whatever duration you give to your keyframe animation. I'm saying 100. If you need something to be a lot smoother, maybe the animation is really long, you might want to increase the steps. But 100 seems to work pretty well. You're going to create an array of NS objects. It's going to loop over the steps. It's basically, in most, you can do this in Cocos 2D. You can do this in Sparrow framework, any game framework. You're using an animation loop, right, which is on a timer. But we don't really have that here. So I'm simulating a timer. Generate all the factors of values that I need to, which creates all my keyframes. And then I'm going to use the keyframes in my easing. So I've got my local media time again. I go get my keyframes. You know, I can use these keyframes now across many animations, but I'm just going to create the one. So the home in animation. I create my keyframe animation. I'm changing just the position X. And you'll see down there where the values are, I'm assigning the keyframes. Now, because I'm spreading these keyframes evenly over my animation, I don't need to provide key times. Usually with key times and values, you're providing a one-to-one relationship between the time that you want the keyframe to happen and what the keyframe value is. If you remember back to that Flash example, we had a keyframe at 1 and a keyframe at like 50, right? So I would need to time that out to tell this animation when to do the next keyframe. But as it is, it's spread evenly, so it works out nicely. And I'll leave you with this bit of wisdom at the end of our animation demo. If you can't animate it, fake it. It's very common. We as developers are so close to the implementation of what we're working on that sometimes we are thinking like builders. We have to do it like it's supposed to mechanically work. Reality is, what's on screen can be completely faked, okay? I remember the first time I had to do a slot machine, right? And you wanted to get the tumblers to spin and look all blurry and everything. I tried to make them spin really fast, and I was like, this is so hard. Why is this hard? And the CPU was screaming at me, and the fan was blowing, and it was just no good. Dude, all you got to do, open up Photoshop, blur all the digits. So you create real digits, you create blurred digits, and just replace the frames like that, okay? I was talking to somebody about a rotation thing yesterday, and it may be the right solution, it may be completely wrong. But you can actually use a UI image and create a slideshow from it. Did you know that? You assign a bunch of images to a UI image, and it'll play it like a slideshow. So if you need something to animate in that way, and you just want to provide the images that represent the frames of what you're doing, you can do that. Will it perform as well as one of these animations? I don't know. That's what Instruments is for. You tell me. But it's an option for you, okay? So if you get bogged down in trying to do a really complex animation, think to yourself, do I really need to do the full implementation, or can I fake it? So I've got some resources for you. I believe the slides are being made available. I'll find that out. If they're not being made available, I'll certainly provide these. But there's some fantastic WWDC talks. There's the Frank Kruger presentation, which was a Xamarin seminar. Are you guys familiar with the Xamarin seminars? They do these things pretty regularly, like once a month at least, right? Those are fantastic to listen in on. I've seen the mono game stuff, and these things, and they're all on YouTube too. A lot of really great resources for you guys to check out. And then Penner's Easing Equations and Robin DeBrule's repository. Tons of fantastic C# code in there, especially if you're doing any kind of gaming. You can find a lot of really great stuff in there. So I think we've covered everything. I'm happy to take questions. Please follow me on Twitter. I would love to get more Xamarin interested people in my community so we can chat more about these sorts of things. Any questions? Yeah.
So as soon as you add it, it starts right there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to kick off right away. Right? Unless you set a delay, and then it's going to wait.
These kiosk systems that you do tend to still lean towards Flash that you control over time?
Right. So the kiosks primarily have been Flash. But since they've been going towards iPads as the touch device, it makes a whole lot more. And I've done Flash as the runtime for those. And at best, it's adequate. It just, if you're doing stage 3D stuff, okay, which is 3D rendering, which runs right on top of OpenGL, it's fantastic, runs really smooth. But if you're not using stage 3D, then you're not getting a lot of the hardware acceleration. It doesn't work well. So I'm trying to move my clients more towards using a Xamarin solution. And so what I actually did with the recent application was I was already done with the Flash version. Over one Saturday, I rebuilt it in Xamarin, showed it to them. They loved it. We were at the end of the project, so unfortunately we weren't able to release it. So I sat in the Mono Mac session too, because I think that it would be a really good solution for kiosks running on a Mac Mini. But yeah, a lot of agencies are starting to go towards the phone gap thing because they find comfort there, but you just can't get the same experience. It's just not that good. Yeah.
Are you taking advantage of any async features in lieu of setting an elapsed video?
Taking care of the pacing instead of using the elapsed handling.
Taking advantage of new async features in lieu of an elapsed video.
That's great. I hadn't considered it. I need to look at that. You think it would be good? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, man. Yeah. So the tween builder is something that I just wrote in preparation for all this stuff. So I mean, I'll happily put that up. All this code I put into my fork of the monotouch samples. So my GitHub handle is my name. So you can definitely check that out there. You're more than happy, take it and use it. The easing equations themselves I pulled in from Robin DeBrule's repository. Anybody else? Cool. Thanks for coming, guys. If you want to chat anymore, I'll be around.